Hey folks, Malforian here, and today we're going through Johan's replies to the 10th EU5 dev diary. That was all around trade, and as always with Johan, he goes into a few other systems as well during these replies. I will say the man himself did 7 pages of replies this time round, a new record. He always does a lot of replies, but yeah, 7 pages, quite a lot. I have gone through and picked the most relevant questions. A lot of them were kind of duplicated or kind of answered the same thing, so as always, I will leave a link to it in the description down below if you do want to go read through all of his replies, but I won't waste any more time. As I said, there's a lot for us to get through today, so let's get going with the first one. Does Gibraltar count as a sound? This is where you can set up a toll booth on trade, basically, and take some money from trade routes, and the answer is no, which is unfortunate. I thought this would be one of them. I guess it would affect too much, I guess. There's a lot of nations in the Mediterranean that would be affected. I can kind of see why this wasn't included, and also it wasn't really historically that much of one that I know of. Someone could correct me in the comments down below if I'm wrong, but I will say in one of the follow-up replies, he did say that a lot of this is moddable. You could just add one of these wherever you want, really. So if you really do want to set up a toll in Gibraltar, just make a mod, or I'm sure there'll be one at launch or soon after where you can do so. Will certain goods require more capacity to ship than others? The answer being yes. I would imagine things like coal, etc. are going to take up more capacity than grain or maybe cotton, etc. Something that's a little bit lighter, because we all know 50 kilograms of cotton weighs less than 50 kilograms of coal. That obviously makes sense. There's no issues with that logic at all. On to the next question. Were the lowlands dependent on English trade at the time? Maybe it's better to separate them. This was regarding the map that was part of the dev diary that showed the London market basically in control of all the lowlands. Johan replying that they did have them separate before, but the problem being that they were so small and weak that either London, Cologne, or Lubeck basically deleted them within a couple of years, so it didn't really make sense to leave them in there because it would always disappear within a few years, so they might as well just start the game off in a way that the game is going to progress to anyway within a few years. But as he says, gameplay is dynamic, so markets will change as you and the AI plays. So if you do want to set up a market there, which is covered later on how you can do that, you can rebuild this and kind of see if you can fight back the market forces around you and have that kind of lowlands market there if you can build it and be successful enough. The next question, are sound tolls only limited to straits, or could other countries get a fee for allowing trade to pass through their lands during the transportation? Currently straits only, so you can't set up like a toll booth on a road between like Italy and Germany or something and force all trade to go through it. That's not possible. I'm sure there'll be mods though that will allow it if you do really want that to happen. Sir Boots then asked, does that mean that markets take the land of other markets and grow and shrink depending on various factors? The answer being yes. Think of markets much like realms in most games, where the land will kind of flex up and down depending on how powerful they all are. You can get ones that disappear and then you fill in the land with yours and stuff like that. So that's really how you should think about how these will work. They're not going to be static at all. They could change constantly. Zaragoza then asked a pretty big question, but it was really all around moving a market somewhere else, or does it always have to be where it started? And Johan replying, you can move it and it will affect things because the market capital is like the epicenter of its power. So think of England if you have it in London at the start, but for some reason you took over Scotland and then moved your trade capital to Edinburgh. It would actually affect things because it would weaken the epicenter of your power. So France potentially could start moving into the south of England if Paris really got powerful, which could happen anyway, but a lot harder if London's there closer to Paris. If you moved yours up to Edinburgh, there's a lot more territory for your power to move over, so you do weaken yourself in theory, although you could use this strategically and try and move it towards somewhere where you might think you could gain a lot more land where there's weakness. But I would imagine the general rule is that if somewhere's really weak, it's probably not worth trying to steal either, but good to see it does actually affect it. You can move it around and it will affect the power and how it's distributed. And the next question is all around, can a country own multiple markets? And the answer is yes, you want to have as many markets as you can. This is one of the things that I think will confuse people, and it kind of confused me for a while, is that you don't really want one huge market, and in a lot of places you're not going to be able to do that, and there are some follow-up questions around that, especially around like how the English Empire and Portugal, etc., how the markets work for those countries that technically owned these other places in their empires, but it doesn't work like that when it comes to trade, and there's a lot of information about that in the follow-up replies, but generally it doesn't really have to be one huge market. There isn't that many benefits for having that versus controlling 2 markets in the same place in a way. And the next question is all about how the trade system could become very micromanagey, moving goods between certain markets. And Johan really just reiterating that you can automate all of this, or some players will automate most of it, but then lock certain trades that they want to control. And then obviously many of us will just do all the micromanaging for playing it. It does depend where you play. If you're playing a trading nation, I think people will micromanage that because that's probably the gameplay they're going for. If you're playing somewhere that isn't really that interested in trade, then you're probably going to automate it and not worry about it and be concentrating on other areas of the game. But again, Johan really just saying you can automate as much of this as you want. It might seem micromanagey, but you can mitigate that with the options in the game. Kingsley Dale then asked, so will trade goods chain across markets? Like if there is demand for spices in London, will it try buy spices from neighbouring markets, causing them to have an increased demand for spices, meaning they will look for spices in neighbouring markets, etc. So the theory of like England would then pulse the next market looking for spices. That market would then think, oh, London wants spices, so I'm going to look for spices. And that would snake across the map until they found somewhere that did have spices. And then that would connect them all up. And that's how the spice would flow, as people say. And Johan's reply saying, yes, technically it does work that way, but you are not forced to buy from a neighbouring market. If you have range, you can import from Alexandria to London directly. So it does kind of work that way, especially I would think early in the game. But later on, once you have more range to your trade power, you can trade directly with other areas on the map. So it kind of negates the need for that as you progress through the game by the sounds of it. Sealands then asked, are there upper and lower caps for prices like in Victoria 3? Or do you really calculate supply and demand uncapped? So can prices in theory escalate up to 1 billion per item? And Johan, I don't know how much I believe him, but he says he doesn't know how Victoria 3 works. I guess he's got no reason to lie about it, but it is kind of wild, I guess, in my mind, that he hasn't played Victoria 3 at all and kind of seen how it works. But, you know, he's a busy man with Europa Universalis, so it could be true. And he's got no reason to lie either. It was just a bit of a surprise to me. But he does say there are minimum and maximum price factors depending on the current age. So they are locked off at a high and low area, depending when you're playing in the game, which I guess makes sense. Cheetah William then asked with a really interesting question, I think a lot around how merchant republics, etc. could work as well. Can you be a middleman? They want to have a trade empire where they just move goods from one place to another, picking up items from the Far East, say, and then bringing them to Europe, but not for yourself. You're actually just going to do that to resell them to other people. And Johan's saying this is one of the player fantasies that will be possible. You can get rich by trading X from A to B and not actually needing it yourself. And that is a cool way to play. Again, these different ways you can play this game by the sounds of it, even more so than EU4, I think. Fire Fury PT then asked, I'm curious on how army battles will work. Will it work the same way as EU4? And the answer just being no. And next week's Dev Diary, although we might not find out how battles work, is focused on the military side of this game. So even if it's not really talked about in the Dev Diary, which I imagine it won't be, I think it'll be more about how you make units, the support they need, etc. I would imagine Johan won't be able to resist giving us some answers in the replies, as he always does. Mr. Arrow then asked, will this simulate the Silk Road with the middlemen earning all the profit between it? And Johan replying that yes, this is the case. You can do that. I guess it kind of links into the previous one about how somewhere will like pulse along all the different markets, trying to find a good, and then that will stimulate that market to find the good. And then that's how you'll build these roads of trade, basically. And all the people within there are earning a cut. Not the same as tolls, where you're just sending a toll down and everything that passes through there gives you a cut of that money. It's more the people on the route, the kind of like the trade centers, are earning a slight cut of the profit as it moves along the line. Meth then asked, the way they understand it, a market is really just a market city that captures locations around it based on its influence. So how big the market becomes depending on how many other markets are near, and the answer is yes. There are buildings that can also increase your power or laws and privileges and other things that can increase it for you as well. So that's a good way to think about it. It is really just that market city, and then it spreads its influence outside of it, ignoring country borders, and tries to gobble up as much land as it can. And then when it butts up against another market, that's where the kind of trade fight in a way happens. Obviously not a physical fight in most cases, but that kind of like balancing of numbers, who has the most influence here, and they'll be flexing up and down their size depending on how that works out. Red Rosalina then asks, will massive devastating wars between multiple AIs affect the trade for the player? If a player's economy is heavily tied to trade, will the conflict affect them negatively, forcing them to potentially get involved in the war? And this is such an amazing answer, yes. It's not fun to see cities you import goods on from being ravaged and not being able to restore their output for many years. So you could be chilling, just doing a lot of trade, making a lot of money, and then maybe two of the people you get the most amount of goods from, maybe they're fighting each other, or maybe an unrelated nation is attacking your coal supply, And you can either watch that play out, but then the problem is the production of that coal is going to drop as that nation is at war. So maybe you'll be influenced to think, well, I'll go in and help them because I need this war finished as quick as possible because I need that coal to be doing things. So I'm going to get involved on their side. Or just maybe you side with the attacking nation thinking, well, let's get the war finished quicker for them, and then I'll just set up trade with that nation instead. And that's going to set up some cool dynamics for how wars might play out, especially as the player deciding who you're going to get involved with. And maybe you're not planning on doing some wars, but you kind of get dragged into them. How, historically that kind of thing happened. Hex Mode then asked, civil wars are countries now? I'm not 100% sure what this was triggered by. But anyway, Johan said yes. So it looks like when a civil war happens, very much like the early Civilization games in a way, take from this that when they split in a civil war, both sides technically become separate nations until one of them wins, and then they reunify together, and I guess there's a chance they will peace out, and then the two nations permanently split into two. I think this is a really cool way for this to happen. You can then support one side or the other, I suppose, depending on which way you want that to work out. Espadkins then asks, given that there is trade range, does that mean that some goods like silk will be moving from market to market to get to end producers? If the markets in between are disrupted, will trade try to find alternate routes to end markets? Each trade is between two markets on a path, is Johan's reply, which I guess answers this question. I'm not 100% sure. Someone let me know in the comments if it does make 100% sense to the question. I think he's just reinforcing that the trade will find the quickest route, and if there's disruption in a certain area, it will just move around it to the quickest safe route, I guess. Daniel the Finlander then asked another question regarding the low countries that we saw at the beginning of this video. He was saying, how do you declare independence economically by starting your own market? Which you can do in this. You can basically just start your own market whenever you want. As Johan says here, it costs a lot of money. I think later on he says it costs 1,000 gold at the moment. That isn't like balanced at all. He's just saying that's how much in the build at the moment it costs. But you're going to have to think about this because you can spend that money, found your own market, and then it just gets deleted by somebody else's more powerful market anyway. Think of it like if Wales suddenly became independent from England. If they then formed their own market, it would be technically possible to do that, but it would very quickly just get wiped out by the London market because it's so much more powerful. It'd be very hard for them to quickly build up powerful enough to fight off the forces of the London trade market's power. They'd just get wiped out and nothing would happen. And you've basically just wasted all that money by doing it. The next question also around the Silk Road. Given that there is terra incognita and European traders can't go to China directly at the beginning of the game, will the game be able to simulate the demand for Asian goods in Europe? Can a significant demand for, say, silk in Constantinople prompt the AI in Persia to import it from further east, prompting the actors in that further east market to import it from China and move it west? So how will that work in the game before you've discovered all the map? Yes, the prices in China are cheaper than the ones in Persia, and Persia is cheaper than, let's say, the prices in Venice. So again, reinforcing this thing of that if there is strong enough demand somewhere, the game will try and get goods from somewhere else to feed into that demand. So if you build a textile mill somewhere, it will find that cotton elsewhere in the game, and if it's profitable enough, it will create that link and bring those goods there through other markets. And that's how the system will work if you can think about it that way. Canifer then asked, how will the markets work for colonial possessions? Will Goa remain in whatever Indian market it started in, or will it become part of the Lisbon market? And if it stays as part of the original market, what implications would that have? And Johan replying, it will stay in India. There is no way Portugal would ever propagate market power that far. So again, covering that the fact that trade markets are that city really, and then the power emanates out of it. You can't just conquer land into a market and then just say, that land is in my market now, even if it's across the world. It doesn't work that way. And Johan's saying that isn't how it's going to work. But what it does do is that it gives Portugal a lot of nice access into the Indian market, and it can build up a lot of merchant power, so you can make sure you can export Indian goods ahead of others trying to trade. As your merchant power gets higher, you basically become first in line for trading, so you're then able to export those elsewhere and make all the money that way. So that's how that's going to work. You would go into Goa and you just become very powerful in that trade network, and then kind of, I guess, steal things out of there as you're kind of cherry picking what you want, I suppose, and sending that back to Lisbon, or just making money by being the top person exporting them. Casper then asked, will market language be important for anything? Yes, it will, which just makes sense. It was highlighted on the screenshot yesterday showing the language, so I think it was pretty obvious it would take some effect with it being listed there. Rule Britannia then with a pretty easy question, is there any way for a player to route trade manually? And the answer is no, it always goes the shortest route. So it's not like that CK3 travel system where you can customize the route that you're walking on. In this case, it's always the shortest route. Cruxador then asked, how dynamic are sound tolls? Can you put one in the Straits of Malacca? And the answer being that you can mod them in there, but you can't build them in-game. I believe there's only set ones, and they're always the set ones. I wonder whether it does change when, like, the Nile opens or something. Maybe that changes, but for the most part, they are in certain places, but you can just mod them in if you want to. Palesi Admiral then asks, will pirates steal goods from merchants at sea and on roads if infrastructure is not guarded and maintained? And of course, will that raise prices? Pirates and privateers will create havoc on trade routes, is Johan's reply. So you are going to have to take care of privateers, more so than in EU4, it sounds like. They are going to cause a lot of trouble if you let them kind of freely roam and get up to no good. The next question, so Johan, are you confirming that absolutely nothing is hard-coded? Not even remotely. I think this guy's got like some real skin in this game. To prevent an American nation from making trade flow backwards from Europe to the Americas, which is actually a really cool question. As you know, if you've played EU4, the trade routes are locked in place. You can't like reverse them or anything like that. You can't really trade from Europe to America easily. And the answer is no, there is nothing preventing this. So in theory, you could build up a nation so powerful in America or in Brazil or somewhere early on, and then actually take things from Europe. That could be a pretty cool campaign, trying to really force that change over so America becomes really powerful, or somewhere in South America becomes so powerful it actually draws things out of Europe and kind of reverses the system of trade. That would actually be really interesting to play through. Does infrastructure such as roads and ports impact trade efficiency? So if I want to trade a Spain with France, if I built a strong road network to France, would it help make the trade more effective? And the answer is yes. If you do have those trade partners, especially landlocked, where you're wanting to trade with them, if you build up the infrastructure, it actually makes it better, faster, and probably more profitable to actually do the same trade, just because the actual infrastructure there is helping you be more effective. The next question, are there other sounds? Feels like a natural fit would be Singapore, Malacca as well. And the answer is yes. As we've covered previously, there are other ones around there. It isn't just the Baltic Sea one that is referenced quite a lot. Next, we have someone asking, can I build a port in every city, or are ports arranged for special cities? The answer being, ports are not something you build. There are many port-related buildings, though. I'm not 100% sure what this means. I'm guessing it means there are certain ports that are always located. I guess natural ports, or I guess historically big ports that happened. But with Johan saying many port-related buildings, I'm not sure if he means in those port areas you can build a lot of things, or whether outside of those you can build port-related things. Maybe you can build up like trade network where they're not exactly ports, but they're areas where ships can come in, I don't know, not like refuel because it's the age of sail, but you know what I mean. Maybe helps you kind of push out your trade network because there's somewhere for a ship to come in, replenish, and then move on. But we'll get a lot more information about this in a future dev diary, I'm sure. Salan then asked, will the diplomacy option sound toll exception be available in peace deals for a certain amount of time? And the answer is yes, these are possible. So you can go to war with somebody who owns one of these sound tolls and say, okay, I'm not going to come conquer you, but I want exception from these tolls. I want to make all the money myself, thank you very much. And you can do that, which is awesome. Again, cool little mechanic there that you can make use of. Rule Britannia back with another question, unsurprisingly about England. If England established colonies in the American East Coast, would these be part of the London market, or would they make their own market? And as we've kind of discussed already, they will make their own America East market. They would not be part of the London market because the influence of London doesn't stretch that far when it comes to trade. It would make its own trade market, and because you are the colony owner, you're basically going to be in charge of that unless other nations get close enough and start influencing it even more than you can. The Jaldan then asks, surprised the engine can handle so much supply and demand for over 70 items. This actually came up quite a bit after they talked about goods. I think it was 2 weeks ago now. And they do bring up that Victoria 2 had a lot of issues keeping the economic game going once this really started to take effect. And Johan again saying, he did mention this before in other dev diaries, that they have the game running already with all of this, and he's very happy with the current performance. I see why they brought up Victoria 2, but you've got to think, Victoria 2 came out so long ago. They've learned so much. Their game engines are so much better. I know people will disagree with that, but you know, the tech is a lot better and it can handle a lot more stuff. Rudolph then asks, since trade will need to trace a path, will there be a neat map mode where you can see all the trade routes? And the answer is yes. Actually, if you have a market selected, you can see all the exports and imports. It has a nice animated arrow on the map, which is cool. Also, when creating a trade, that map mode colors the possible market screen and outlines the possible path of the map, depending on which markets you have the cursor over. There's going to be a lot of trade map modes. The more map modes, the better. I think the more information you have as a player, it makes the game easier to understand and see what's going on when you're trying to make decisions, and it sounds like this is the case. You're going to be able to see all these imports and exports. It might even help you decide who you're going to go to war for, or maybe if you want to get influence in a certain area for the trade as well. So all cool information. Meth then asks, do locations buy goods from the market in the order that is determined by market access, i.e. the highest access buys all their demanded goods first, then the second, and so on? And the answer being yes, that is how it works. Kind of links into that question about Portugal and Goa. If you could come in and be the highest market access, you kind of gobble up all the goods you want and then take them off. This is affected by the domestic first. So if I remember correctly, the domestic market will always take everything they need first, and then everything else, like the surplus from that, is the trade. You would take the most of the trade surplus. You wouldn't like be depriving the local market of what they need. You just take all the excess for yourself, or a percentage of it if you are the top person. The Red Death then asks, he doesn't really understand how some of this works, and I will admit it is kind of confusing. You've really got to separate that markets are different to countries, even if they are kind of outlined in the same place. So the London market, although England controls it, it isn't technically part of the English Empire. It is just that England owns it, and obviously their influence affects other things. And really saying like, well, what's the bonus for being in control of the actual location if you're not in theory like running it directly, because you can't control like the influence that spreads from it and things like that. And Johan basically saying the market centers have some nice inherent bonuses to the power and capacity, and far more if you build up the infrastructure for it. So that's why you want to build up the infrastructure of these markets if you can. I imagine, again, if you're playing in an area that controls London, if you build up the buildings in London that affect trade, that is going to help you, even though you don't technically own it. But then Johan also kind of clarifying that although you don't own it directly, as I say, it's kind of tangentially owned by you, you can, as the kind of ruling nation of that trade node, control who trades in that trade node. I believe that's what he's saying anyway, as he says, if you can decide who is allowed to trade, that's the true control. So it does sound like, although you don't, like I say, directly own the London trade node, because think about it, if England gets defeated and France goes in there, the London trade node would still exist. It would just be that France then technically owned it because they would have the land that it's in. It wouldn't get destroyed and the London market get pushed back into, say, Scotland. The two markets would still exist. There'd still be the Paris market and the London market, and then it would just be that France would own the land that the London market is in. But it does sound like that in that example, France would get some control over what happens there. So it sounds like they would control, in theory, who could then trade in the London market. And with that, that's the end of the Johan replies that I've picked out. As I said, quite a lot of them this week. I did my best to kind of combine answers because there were a lot of questions that were pretty much the same question, but in different kind of circumstances, etc. So I did kind of merge them together in my replies, but hopefully you've enjoyed it. These do seem to go over quite well on the channel, so I do appreciate everyone who watches them, hits likes, subscribes obviously to the channel as well. I am covering a lot of EU5 up to announcement, launch and beyond, as I say in every video, and I also play a lot of Crusader Kings and other historical strategy games. So if you have enjoyed today's video, I do very similar things for Crusader Kings. So if you'd like to hear me ramble on about information on Paradox games, you've come to the right place. But we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.